I'm going to get started to be respectful for everyone's time. Again, if you're here for the Unreal Engine session, there's been a mix-up in the links, and you should join the other link that Amanda Floto will be sending. So please don't just leave and then join the same link again, because that's going to still be the wrong link. This is an introduction to research, the double diamond process and the research session. And is intended for if you are in a beginner level about research or even just the design process. So before we start, I just really want to talk about the notion of design and design thinking, and then going into how you are going to define the problem and do every bit of details to help you in making better decisions when you design. Now we know the topic of it, so feel free to just ask questions about research or even about your project. If you want to apply that into this startup project, how you might want to approach it. But before we begin, I just really want to just do a quick poll in asking, how many of you, I'm just wondering what your majors are. Can you type that on your chat, what your majors are? Again, we're seeing more people joining here. I just want to do a PSA that way there's been a mix up in the links, that if you're here for the visual effects, the Unreal Engine session, then Amanda will be sending the link to the chat, and you can go to that link instead. This one is about the introduction to research and the double diamond process. And I apologize to the people who've been here for a while and been listening to me saying the same thing again and again. Okay, great. So we're seeing a lot of different majors. So for example, I'm seeing for example, furnitures or even photography. That might be something that, fashion design, that might be something that's easier for, for you to explain to other people. But if you're from, say, interaction design, interactive technology, IDGM, or from UX design, I'm wondering, or service design even, I'm wondering how many of you have difficulties explaining your major or what you do to your family when you're in Thanksgiving or Christmas? So some people say definitely. Yeah, so that's a real pain, right? So what even is design? Because the thing is that even we don't fully understand. But here's the thing, think about this. In designing, let's not talk about design for a second. No, this is a DMV. I'm not sure how many of you have been there, but I'm about to get my learner's permit, and it's a terrible experience. It's horrifying. I think in the COVID times it's better because there's less people, but pre-COVID time is horrifying, DMV. And think about this. Your experience in there is actually part of the design. It's a badly designed experience for you. So when we talk about user experience design or service design, this is a lot about it. How's your experience been like there, right? How bad is it? Is there any good part of it? Why is it bad? And thinking about this, we need to go into the notion of what design really is, because there's a lot of design, you are a lot of different designers, and there are a lot of different notions of designs that you will learn across your major. For example, you see, furniture design, who are more focused on to the experience of using, the artifacts, the used furnitures. Graphic design, which will be more focused on designing visuals and creating the experience that is going to be experienced through mainly eyes. And you're going to see different other design majors that are going to be used on different aspects. So in terms of design, Buchanan, who's a researcher and a designer, has proposed a system for us. You see design from different complexity levels. It doesn't mean that any one is more difficult than the other, but it does mean that in designing symbols, it's going to be more discrete. You're going to be designing different artifacts. You're going to be designing visuals and graphics for that. But when you get up there, you're going to see design for interactions, not just the visible ones, but more of the invisible nature of the things. For example, the DMV example that I just put in, and even systems. And when you think about designing systems, and I'm not going to use NFT or blockchain because there's a bit too cliche, But if you think about systems that are complex in nature, in examples that you can think of, even the government itself, how the local county, state, and the government work together, that's a complex system. How do you design for that? The health system, like Lena said, the school systems, and a lot of these different components that are complex in nature. And these are the things that are more complex for this to design for. Now, designing for symbols is also difficult. There are a lot of cognitive limitations and different aspects of it that you need to consider. But I just want to point out that design does not only mean designing for visuals. So if your family, if your relative says, oh, you're a graphic designer, when you mention that you're a service designer or any kind of designer, no, you can explain to them that anything from designing this iPhone to designing this cardigan, to designing the slides, to designing the systems that you're in, or even the homes and the DMV experience you're going to be at, those are all designs. So design is all around us. But here's the thing, if all of those are design, then what's our job then? So think about this. We have the problem, users, and the solution provider. And what we're trying to do as designers are really to try to find the solution fit. And we're seeing the increase and the rise of participatory design. This is a notion that everyone designs, And here's the question is that, if everybody designs, then what's really our role? If the people, even someone who does not have a title of a designer in the federal government, designs educational content, designs the traffic system, design the DMV experience, even the interior design for that, what really is our role? Well, now, in this section, we're going to talk about design strictly as a process, not as a designing artifacts or as a deliverable. We don't see design as only a deliverable. We see that as a iterative process. This is a very kind of common model that people use to explain something called design thinking. It's a process that people use to generate something. If you apply this process, you can do that on graphic design, healthcare design. You can apply it to industrial design, furniture design, fashion design, advertising, and anything, everything that you can think of. So with this, we also see a lot of other cases where there is this model from different companies. Now, you might be confused because you're going to see a lot of these different iterations, slightly different versions of these rings or like these iterative processes. But the truth is they don't really matter as much. What do matter is this. What matters is the process of how you explore and define your problems and how you explore and define your solution. So every kind of process follows in a similar way. And this is designed by the Design Council in the UK, where they have something called a DoubleDiamond process, which is kind of the title of this session. It starts from discovering to defining and developing and delivering. And you can see why it's called the DoubleDiamond is that because the process is shaped like two little diamonds. And what happens here is that you're going to see these expanding and kind of restricting shapes. What happens is that you're going to have ideas to start with on the left-hand side, and you're going to discover and expand your problem space into a very large space and narrowing down, funneling them down into a problem or problems that you're going to figure out. And the same thing for develop and deliver. So this is a DoubleDiamond process. And if you go back to even the other kinds of design that we just look at, other kind of processes, they're in a way similar. You're trying to empathize and generate a lot of data, and you're going to define the problem, and you're going to ideate a bunch of things. You're going to prototype and narrow it down, and you're going to test it. And these are all in a similar ways. So think of it this way, there's no one single design process, but this is the most common one. So I just want to kind of remind you of that. The process of design is to solve problems, not to follow a regular, strict process. But for today, we're going to focus only on discover. Tomorrow, we'll have a session that will talk about defining the problem. But today, let's get crazy and just explore a different range of problems. So when talking about having a problem, solving a problem, you only got 1 week for this startup. How are you going to be able to define a problem in such a short amount of time? Why can't I just design straight away? I know the problem already. I have my mind on what the future problem is. But here's the thing. Think about this thing. What does this look like? Right? This is an MRI machine. Yep. Right. Yes, this is an MRI machine. Someone says MRI for kids. That's absolutely correct. But why is it MRI for kids? Right? If you think about this MRI machine, this is so different to what you see on a daily basis about what MRI machine looks like. So why did they do this? Well, it has to go back to GE, General Electric, when they tasked the engineer to solve a problem of making an MRI machine for kids. They started out by thinking, oh, what are the problems that it has for kids? Well, it's very loud. It's an enclosed space. The family isn't there with them. And that's going to be a scary experience. And what they thought at the beginning is to start by thinking about, oh, why don't we just design an MRI machine that's smaller, that's less loud, that's quieter, something that where the parents can be there with them, something that's safer for the kids. So in that case, they can solve the problems. But is that really the problem? Because think about the problem we just mentioned. The problem is being scared, all the emotional issues that you see there. And certainly, if you improve the machine, it's going to help. But is it really gonna be worth it spending millions and billions of dollars on inventing a new MRI machine that's much quieter, right? So what they set out to do is to understand the struggles and pivoting to another problem, which is the emotional problems that I just mentioned. And by improving the visual design and even creating the experience where you see that the staffs are not just wearing the traditional, the scrubs, but the scrubs are more colorful. It's an experience for the kids and saying that, oh, I'm the captain and I'm going to take you through a journey in a spaceship. And in that case, that's the pivoting moment where you're going to solve a problem in a much more effective way. You're not going to spend $1 million on this project with reinventing MRI machines. And the same thing for this one. This is a baby incubator. If you're in NICU, you can see this very often. That's like a life-saving measure for children, for a lot of babies. Now, the team at Stanford has started out in thinking, how can they make this more affordable? And they started thinking all the features needed in here, all those oxygen, all those different meters and things they need in there. But when they do their research, when they discover the problems, they find out that those are not really the main cause of death. What the parents and what the people need are really just a way to keep the baby warm and safe in the pod, because in the pod it can be very cold on the way from their homes where they gave birth to the hospital. And understanding this as a problem helped them in designing something that's much cheaper, very less costly, obviously, and something that's really effective in saving the lives of the babies. So here's really the main point. Research is not a mean for you to fully understand the scope of the thing, but it's a mean for you to empathize, understand, and to be informed so you can have a better direction. Now, here's the problem. You got a lot of different ideas in your mind, a lot of different questions about the future in your mind now. But there's a problem with problem scoping, is that you don't really know where to start. You can scope too large, you can scope too small and be wrong. But it's actually better to be wrong at the very beginning than to be wrong later. So let's take an example. So we're going to make this more practical. Let's say we're going to solve a problem with waste. So for example, I'm going to try to say, have a very large scope right now and see how I drill down. I'm going to want to solve the problem with waste. I don't know what the problem with waste is yet, but I know that it's actually a big problem in this world with different recycling and different issues with our landfill and incinerators. I'm going to want to solve this. How am I going to define the problem? So the step one is really understanding your goal. What is it that you're really trying to achieve? And by the way, Feel free to drop questions in the chat anytime you want to, and I'll try to clarify it right after each step. So for example, for this goal, you might have listed out some goals for you to say reduce waste, create a circular economy in consumers' homes, or improving the municipal waste management. And these are good goals to get started with. You don't have to worry if your goals are too dreamy or if they are too concrete yet. Just start with something and you'll learn and improve along the way. And once you have your goal, you should define your questions. What are you trying to understand in order to achieve these goals? And that's the main thing about research. So how do we do it? Now, let's look at a few bunch of problems. Why do we have a waste problem? And that's not a bad question, but it's a bit too broad and it has too many answers. Think about this. Why do we have a waste problem? There are way too many answers for this, and there's no one concrete single thing that you can focus on. And that's going to be a problem for you, especially in a project that only lasts for 1 week. You're going to spend the weekend, you're going to spend the next week understanding the problem, empathizing with the people, discovering the problems, and you don't want to be too broad with it, and then only to find out that you don't have time to narrow down and solve the problems. So the other one is that, what if we get too narrow with this? How much waste do we have a day? These are the things that you don't really need to do proper primary research on. It's not a bad question. It helps you in getting informed, but it's easily searchable and it's not really helpful in solving the problem. No, the problem is not how much waste we have, it's why do we have how much waste we have, right? So think about this. The good questions are going to be specific, they're going to be open to arguments, and they're going to be clear and unambiguous. And what I mean is that, why do people waste what they waste? This is a good one. It includes facts that you can search online. For example, what do they waste? But it also includes facts that you don't really know, that are open to explorations. And it's really clear in understanding the cause of the problem. It helps you in understanding, why do people do that? Why is there a waste problem? So you're trying to think of a pyramid where your problem about why do we have a waste problem as a top problem, but there are multiple different networked issues underneath that you're going to have to answer before getting to there. And for example, the other question that you can have would be, what are the differences in the trash storage and trash removal process between people who recycle and people who don't? Now, that's a bit of a mouthful, that's a bit long, but it opens opportunities and is specific enough for you to enable empathy across different types of users and people. You can understand the people who recycle and the people who don't. You can empathize with them and you can try to dig deeper, for example, in this case, into trash storage and trash removal, and try to figure out how you might want to improve that. So after defining those questions, you want to do a desktop research. Secondary research, we call them sometimes. It's really about understanding the basics of the problem space. Now, a lot of the times, if you go look up secondary research or literature review, they're going to be a very long list of suggestions for you to just go dig deep into data, review the sources, but that's going to take a lot of time, and I don't suppose you have the time for that. So let's try to break things down. If we talk about why do people waste what they waste, what you're trying to break down is that what do people waste at all? How much waste do they have per day? And really, what's the distribution among different groups, age groups, income groups? You're trying to find different information to see if there are patterns, trends, and that's your goal. Your goal is to understand the basics of the problem space. So think about it in this way. Searching for stuff is going to be very helpful. You're going to be able to use different resources like Statista, Google Scholar, or Google to get a deeper understanding of these problems and kind of get a basic understanding of the space, but don't spend too much time on it, or else you're going to risk not having enough time for your primary research, which we're going to talk about later. Now, I added the disclaimer to the Google one because a lot of people don't know how to do Google searches, and I'm not going to go too deep into it. There are a lot of resources online that you can use for that. But try to be more specific when you're doing Google search. Don't just search how much waste do we have? Don't just search waste statistics. Try to look for different sources. For example, in this example query, this is one query, by the way. This is kind of uncommon to a lot of people who do Google searches, but it's actually a very effective way for you to find accurate sources for you, for your project. For example, if I want to go look at the recycle market, I can just type the keywords in and add a quotation, meaning that I need to see this word. It has to be inside the search result, either in the title or in the content. And I can use comma to separate different queries. Later on, you see that the site :star.gov, it means that I want to specify the site. Now, this is very helpful because if you want to focus on particular sources, like the EPA, I would type site :epa.gov. If I want to search more like industry sources, I can type different consulting companies: McKinsey, Bain, EY, Deloitte, Accenture. These different companies are going to have reports on these different markets, and they're the leading ones. So if you search those websites and you search those keywords, it's very likely that you're going to encounter some reports and some insights that will be more synthesized for you, where you don't have to comb through all the raw data. So learning how to do Google search is very important. But after you've done that Google search and even looking at data and looking at secondary sources, you're going to be able to redefine your problems and questions. Think about this. Now that you have some data, you might find out that people who are in low income group waste more than people in high income group, which sometimes might contradict with what you thought. So how do you go about narrowing, broadening, or pivoting, right? Define your question again. Try to think about what you want to do now. What are your questions that will help you in understanding the problem better? What are the questions that will help you in designing? So in this case, you can really start about thinking what you can do to improve it. And remember, this DoubleDiamond process is not linear. It's a very messy process where you can go expand and narrow and expand again and pivot at any time you want. It's a very messy kind of iterative process that helps you in fail fast and fail early. You want to do that so that you can redefine your questions quicker and you can get to the right answers quicker, which will help you in designing. Now, again, this session is mainly focused on discovering. I'm only going to be very lightly covering in how this is going to be put in the broader context. And with that questions defined, you're going to want to start identifying hypotheses and assumptions. So I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with the scientific process. The scientific process is essentially a bunch of different rigor that is going to be used in understanding some specific problems. For example, I hypothesize that for example, in biological science, you might want to hypothesize that caffeine would reduce the risk of cardiac diseases. And that's a hypothesis because you don't really know if that's true or not. You want to set out to test it. So how does that really translate into the UX world, of solving user problems, solving human problems, right? Now, this is one of the example hypotheses. We hypothesize that people who are not eco-conscious will not actively participate in eco-friendly efforts, but does not resist it. Now, here's a reason why this is a good hypothesis. You're going to have the group of people, which is the people who are not eco-conscious, and you're going to have the action. So a good hypothesis would include the group of participants, a group of people that you're trying to influence or learn more about, and also what you think they will do or think. Think about the traditional form spectrum of what people do. There are what people think, what people actually behave, what people say, and what people listen. So you can think about this in this way. And also there's what people feel, but that's a bit more difficult to understand. So you can hypothesize from these angles on, oh, I hypothesize that people in the low income area does not recycle because they do not have the knowledge of that or awareness of that. And that's something you can set up hypothesis for to understand further if that is true or not. A hypothesis can be true or false. So don't feel bad if your hypothesis turn out to be false. It's going to still help you learn a lot of things. So start hypothesizing now. Think about different hypotheses you have for your own project. What are you going to do for your project in terms of future? What are you going to hypothesize for the future? You can start even typing some hypothesis onto, your project goals onto your notepad or even onto the chat right now, and we can try to improve them together. So we will have some Q&A time for that later. So for example, this is another thing. This is what we call assumptions. Now, the difference between hypothesis and assumptions are that hypotheses are something that you can really test out explicitly, but assumptions are something that's more implicit. You're not gonna necessarily be able to find out if this is necessarily true or not, but it's an assumption that you're gonna make because it's gonna save you time. So for example, based on the secondary data I'm looking at, we assume that the recycling system all across the Chatham County, which is where we're in, is not great. Now, we might have some data to support it, but it's not a full fact yet. But because we don't have the time to understand if this is true or not, we might want to assume that. You're going to learn a lot of times where people would say to UX designers or service designers or researchers, like, don't make assumptions, it's bad. Now, while that is true, assumptions are bad only if you stick with it, only if you truly believe that and not change your mind when data comes in. Assumptions can change if new data shows the contradictory fact. So what you need to do is to stay open and to know that there's a very high chance that you're going to fail fast and fail early. And that's great. Embrace that mindset. So this is another hypothesis that we can have, for example. So really try to hypothesize different stuff based on your research questions as well as your main goal for a project. Start doing that now and talk to it with your teammates and rank them. Not all hypotheses are important. Really, seriously, you really don't want to have all the hypotheses and you want to test every single one of them. Think about which ones are the most important to your goals, which ones are the most important to solving your questions, to answering your questions. So rank them, and later on, you're going to find yourself in the sweet spot of starting to do the primary research. You've now have the data, you now have some questions, the problems. Those would preferably, hopefully happen in a day or two. So you really want to go start talking about that to your teammates right now, because the step 6 is going to be the most tedious and the longest part of the research process. It's also going to be the most fun for some people if you like it. This is kind of a landscape of what you can do in doing user research. It's messy, it's a lot. And you're not going to have time to do every single one of them. How are you going to pick them? Now you can see that there are basically two, it's basically a matrix, and there are two spectrums of it. You can have the behavioral versus attitudinal research, and you can have a qualitative versus quantitative research. Now, more traditionally, we also have something we call generative versus evaluative, which we're not talking about right now, because we're mostly focusing on generative, which is going to be something that you do when you don't have a product yet, when you're not evaluating something. You're not evaluating a screen, you're not evaluating an app, you're not evaluating a service. You're only exploring the problems in a defined space. And these are all the different tools you can use, and they're so messy. But here's the thing. You don't really want to use all of them or take a long time in picking them, because in the product development or service development phase, you're going to have 3 different goals: strategize, execute, or assess. What you're doing right now is mostly doing strategize, which is going to be exploring new opportunities, exploring directions, inspiring yourself. And you can see what typical methods are. Would be field studies, diary studies, survey, data mining, analytics. And what I actually recommend to you for startup next week, is ethnographic field study and participatory design. I'm going to explain what these are and why. Think about the traditional thing that you're going to learn when you're learning design or research. For example, if you've taken contextual inquiry class, you're going to learn surveys, in-depth interviews, focus group, observation, different stuff. How do you pick which one to use? if you are new to research, if you've never even taken a UX class before, or service design class, or industrial design class before, you're not going to know what those research processes are. And there are a lot of details in those research processes that you can't really learn in just an hour seminar or session. So what we're going to use is our inherent nature as a human. Turn yourself back into a baby. How did you learn things? You observe, you go ask questions, you go try to find out why something happened in certain ways, right? So turn yourself back into a baby, try to use back that inherent nature of yours, and go do what we call field studies. These are just names, names and methods. You don't have to call it this way. This is just what we call it. But the reason we recommend it is that it's much more simpler for you to do this. You can go start and just go out in the field and see what people actually behave in the context that you want them to. Now, participatory design is a bit more complicated, and I've included some resources in the resource folder that we'll be sharing with you later on. But essentially, you're trying to gather participants together and try to get them to ideate with you. So it's co-design. You're not just designing yourself for them, you're designing with them. So these are all kind of inherently human thing to do and social thing to do. And you don't have to worry about how do you set up A/B testing, how do you set up a good survey, how do you set up a good interview, because those will be too complicated. So think about this. You really want to get started in understanding the problem space by observing. That's really, really the key thing that you want to do now. This is what we call a lean discovery plan. You want to use this kind of as a tool for you to define your goals, define the problems that you are facing right now, and look at the activities and see which ones you can afford to do. It's a good way for you to start thinking about how much time you need. Because, for example, if you want to go out and do a field study, a field research, and just go out and observe people, it's going to take hours. For example, let's say for the waste problem, if you want to go see how people actually deal with waste, you're going to have to take time to find the people, go to their home, look at their trash can, ask them questions, ask them to take out the trash for you and see how it looks like. Go see how that process is. And in that case, you can get truly behavioral aspects of the problem. And you can see different new issues that you didn't even think of, or new issues that you couldn't get when you just ask people questions. Because if I ask you, can you tell me about your cooking process? You're not going to be able to answer me in a full detail. But observation is the only way that you can get the full detail and fidelity. So again, take a screenshot of this. I mean, you're going to get access to the slides later on, but I truly, truly, truly recommend you go do field study and participatory design, because this is the most efficient way that you can get into understanding problems. Now, I'm not going to talk about sample size and different things like that, because that will only add to the stress of how many people you want to do the research with. I would just say do as many as you could, observe, see the patterns. You're going to learn a lot more different processes and different methods along your classes and UX design and research journey. But just go out, take some time off for the weekend, go out, think about what your problem is, your goals and your hypotheses are, and go find people, knock on people's doors, go talk to them, ask them if you can go see them do something that they already do. I'm seeing Lena has a question. I'm going to address this very soon, right after I talk about some of the tips first. So feel free to keep on asking different questions on the chat, and I'm going to address them very soon. So in doing observation, you're going to be able to ask questions. You can try to ask questions while they're doing it, or you can try to ask questions after they've done that activity. Again, going back to the waste example, if I want to go observe how people deal with waste and why people don't recycle, I would love to go tell them to recycle that for me and see if they're familiar with the process of it. I'm going to try to ask them to take out the trash for me and see how many bags of trash they have. how do they take out the bags of trash? Do they sort the trash? Do they wash the recycling materials before they recycle them? Observe these behaviors, and you're going to be able to ask questions. So really remember your goals and hypotheses. You're really listening and observing. You're not just talking to people. You're not just leading people in something. You're trying to be that baby again. Now, the first one is avoid leading questions. This is a tip for you to ask your questions. What are leading questions? For example, what makes you avoid recycling? This is a leading question. Now, leading questions sometimes have its own space and usage. This question is bad, but it's only bad if they didn't tell you that they avoid recycling. If your participant tells you that, oh, I avoid recycling at all costs, or I don't like recycling, or if they show any avoidance, then you can ask this. But in any other context scenarios, do not ask this right away, because that's going to be misleading, and the participant is going to tell you an answer that they just made up, even if they don't avoid recycling, because people are going to be inherently a social creature. And there are a lot of biases and jargons that we use in describing these different behaviors, different biases. I'm not going to go through them today because this is an introductory class. But let's evaluate this question. Do you hate upcycling? So you're going to see a lot of questions people would ask that are like this. Do you like this? Do you hate that? And these are bad questions because people rarely truly love or hate something to an extreme extent. What you should really try to ask is, what do you think about upcycling? Now, this is a much better question, but it can even be better, because think about this. Not everyone's going to be able to understand what upcycling is. But in this case, you're going to have a better chance in gauging people's thoughts and attitudes. So these are some questions you can ask. I'm not going to teach how to develop a fully fledged interview script or interview guide, because that's going to involve a lot of different details. But just start being a baby, going into observation, ask different questions, think about these questions beforehand. Don't ask leading questions, just observe. And if you see something interesting, ask it. Be respectful to that. And you're going to be amazed at how many insights and how many data points you're going to be able to yield. Take pictures, take notes, observe, understand, empathize. That's your goal. So in terms of observing behaviors, what you can really do is to utilize the tools around you. You want to be able to use your camera phones to take pictures. You want to be able to just be around the people and tell them to do something that is related to your problem. For example, for the waste, I can go ask them to take out the trash and just to see how they deal with it. Put people in the context is so very important. I don't want to take them to a lab or an unfamiliar environment and ask them to take out the trash. You want to go to them. That's why it's called field studies. You want to go in there and see how they do it. Now, the last one is participant bias, which is very difficult to explain and very difficult to avoid, because when you are observing people, if you're observing me, even when I'm taking out the trash or cooking, I'm going to be more conscious about my behavior. Oh, am I wasting this thing? Oh, should I have done that? Like, would they judge me if I do that? So these are the concerns. Now, try to empathize what they might feel. This is also part of the research. Empathize, empathize, empathize. So how are you going to address this? Think of strategies you're going to address these participant bias problems. Try to ease their concerns. Make sure that they know they're not being judged. You're observing their daily behaviors. So there are things you can say to them like, this is not a test. We're not judging you or anything. We're just observing, and we're curious in how you do your day-to-day life things. So think about the problems that you're going to explore for startup, especially with this wide problem space. If you want to solve a problem, education, go see how a person teach other people. Go see how a person learn. Go see how a person go about finding content and resources to learn stuff. These are all the things that you can do to observe and ask about. So after you've observed the people and asked people questions, you're going to get a lot of data. you need to understand that you only have 1 week. Actually, for research, you probably only have a few days because you need time to develop the assets, right? So be sure to be aware of the time you have. There are a lot of methods that people say to you that you can use in defining a problem, which we actually will cover tomorrow. So I'm not going to cover too many of these today, but really don't spend too much time on having all the transcript and everything. But do keep a habit of keeping the raw data and the synthesized information separate. Raw data will be the data that you just got from your observation interviews, things that people said, things that people act, and synthesized informations are going to be insights. For example, we noticed that there's a trend that people are truly aware of the problems with recycling, but they don't have the necessary tools to do that. That could be an insight. That could be a finding. And try to keep them separate so you can refer back to the raw data when you're looking at the information and the synthesized insights. So these are just some kind of initial notes I have for you when you're doing research this weekend. Tomorrow, we'll be talking more about how you can utilize the data and apply them into your design project. Now, one of the biggest things about doing research is having the people to do research with. You don't want to just do research on your teammates because that's going to be very biased. Now, for tips of getting participants, you can either go snowball from connections, ask your friends' friends, and your friends' friends might know some other friends. In that way, you can get a lot more people who might be in a similar situations. Just ask some friends around you. Don't be ashamed of asking for help. You will be surprised at how many people they know. They will know a lot of people who would also know a lot more people who would fit into your demographic and criteria. Now, the second one is, I'm not sure if I recommend this or not, but for 1 week project, I feel like it doesn't hurt that much if you do this, because by paying services like use Zoom, Prolific, or Respondent, you'll be able to recruit participants at your own will. Have screeners, they'll help you in doing scheduling and different stuff, and even with the incentives, but you have to pay them. So the cost would range from around, you can do it as little as $10, $15 per participant to even 30, 50, 100. That's depending on you. Usually $10 Amazon gift card would work fine. So try finding participants and try giving them incentives which will improve your rate of success, your chance of success. Now, going back to here, we talk a lot about observations, interviews, and different methods you can use in understanding the problem. We also talked about, how you can go approach defining the problem in some ways at the very beginning of the research process. So think about this discover process, while you're expanding, there are also some narrowing process inside it. For example, you want to narrow your research scope so that you don't go ask too many questions that are too irrelevant. You want to find out which target user groups you have time to research with. You want to find out which methods you can use. And that's a lot. So, it's been 45 minutes since we've been talking like this, and it's a lot of information for you to absorb. So feel free to ask any questions, let it sink in a bit, and really just go back to the purpose of doing research is to understand the why. You're trying to understand why something happened, how something happened, and how you can improve it. The inherent nature as designer, no matter what designer you are, if you're in graphic design, furniture design, fashion design, advertising design, interactive media, whatever you are doing, you're trying to understand the problem and develop solutions for that. It's going back to that symbol versus artifact versus interactions and services. Pick one or pick a few. You can do services and systems across multiple across the multiple dimensions. So in that case, I just want to leave off the notes with where do we go from here? Now, thinking about the title and your theme, how do you go research about something in the future, right? So feel free to leave on any questions here. Any questions you have about the startup or even about your class projects when you're doing research, how you can apply that to your different other problems. How are you gonna, start doing research for your startup? How are you gonna start defining problems for this project? You can feel free to ask any of these questions. I will try to try my best to answer them. So I want to address the first question, which is from Melina. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing this right. How to suggest we do observation in such a short duration? Now, observation, like I said, takes time. It takes hours of time to go just see a person do something. What you normally would want to do is to restrict the time that you have for the observation to about 2 to 3 hours, because people are going to be tired after that. 2 to 3 hours is actually not a long time to spend in a week, right? If you think about this, you can go ask a friend, can I spend about an hour or two in your house just to see something? It can be seeing how you take out the trash in my context. Or if you want to see something about education, you can say, hey, can I be next to you when you're taking the class online next time? Go ask a professor, see if you can sit in a class, use your own experience, observe how people react, how people do things. Different problem space are going to require different, creativity and strategy in doing research. Because if you're doing healthcare, you can't really go to hospitals right now, right? So if you're doing something related to patients, something related to physicians, nurses, healthcare teams, you're going to run into a bit trouble there, but you can still try to go ask them to take pictures for you, to tell you the day-to-day life in very rich details. In that case, you can get more understanding of how people do things, why people do the certain things, and really just go back to the purpose of doing research, why you're doing this, why you're doing this research, and what you're trying to understand. So I'm hoping, does this answer your question here of how you can, take this little time and just go about understanding the problem? Awesome. Okay, anyone got any concerns, questions? I mean, I know that's a lot, this is I'm hoping this is a bit more comprehensive introduction, but still concise enough. I skipped a lot of details like start designing surveys or designing questions, only included tips. So feel free to let me know if there's any more stuff you want to learn about. I'm going to go back to the slide where we have all these different research methods. Oops, oh, too much. Ouch. Okay, feel free to ask any questions or any concerns. Oh, I'm glad, so you know what, we still have like 10 minutes. You can leave, or we can talk about your projects, and I can maybe also help recommend some research methods you can try to use, or the process that you can try to get started with, or even just suggest we can brainstorm some questions you can go about asking. What are the problem space that you might be interested in now, talking about future. It's a really huge scope, by the way. It's very difficult to just find one single thing that you want to narrow down to. So you're really gonna have some tough time in exploring the problems and exploring what you want to do. But feel free to ask any questions about any methods, or ask any questions about this project or what you want to do. Thank you. Don't be shy. Go ask the questions you want to have. You're gonna have a lot of, I guess, even for me, I'm gonna encounter a lot of problems when I do the research this next week and this weekend, because it's such a broad topic. I'm gonna have lots of concerns. I'm gonna actually, you know what? I didn't add it to the slide, but just for the people who still stayed, there's a place called adplist.org, Amazing Design People List. You can go to there, and there are a lot of design and research mentors that you can ask help from. So besides your own mentor that you're assigned, you can do that and book people's time. So Brooke said, I want to do something with turning energy and using water to accomplish that. I'm not sure how to start researching that. Brooke, do you mind explaining a bit more in detail what you are trying to accomplish in a way. You don't have to tell all the details so that people don't steal it. But just in general, I'm quite interested in helping with exploring how you can get started with the research if I understand a bit more of, like what you're trying to do. Also, while you're typing or while you're trying to talk about your problems, I want to just point out that there are mainly two types of things you're gonna encounter when you're doing research. One is that you don't know what the heck is going on, and two is you think you know what the heck is going on. So for the first type, it will be mostly that you're gonna have problems understanding what your scope even is. You might not even know what to talk about or what to go design for. Or the second one is that you might have an idea already and you want to evaluate that. The second one's a bit more difficult, is what we call evaluative research. But that's something that I can do a talk about once Brooke listed out the problem that they're having. And for the next question we have, how do you approach interviewing participants about sensitive topics? Say you're researching about mental health history, abuse, etc. That's a fantastic question. It's about research ethics. SCAD does not have an ethics board, which sucks. If you do any kind of research, no one's going to bother you doing that. And that's going to be a problem because you're going to touch on sensitive topics like this. You might touch on gambling, alcohol abuse, and these are sensitive topics. So what I would recommend is that actually you want to be aware of this as a problem. There's no, you're not experienced. We are not experienced in dealing with these situations. We're not therapists. We're not anthropologists. We're very beginner designers and researchers trying to understand the problems and empathize with people. So what we want to do is really try to be aware of these as a problem. When we talk about mental health history with someone who has that history, and you're trying to understand about designing experiences to improve experience for people with mental health diseases or issues, then you want to be careful about asking questions when you're talking to them. You don't want to ask things that would trigger them. For example, if they are, say, if they have depression, you want to get a general understanding of what they're depressed about first. There are so many types of depression, and you can't understand every single type of them. Even in talking about, say, alcohol abuse, there are a lot of reasons they abuse alcohol, and you want to gauge how willing they are to talk about it first. And the way you can gauge it is by asking some very simple questions. Hey, maybe we can start by talking a bit about yourself first. You introduce your goal first in a research, and then asking them to introduce themselves. And they're going to be primed into telling you something about your goals, about your research goals. And if they don't talk about it, it means they're not comfortable. But usually what we find out is that if you recruit it from friends, families, and they are willing to participate, usually they're willing to talk about it. But good question, you still want to be safe in addressing these things. Be aware of this. Just the thing about you being aware of these sensitive topics is a good sign. You don't want to just go into it and not realize that it's a problem. So very good question. Let me know. I think I'm on Discord. You can still tag me. I'm on Discord as Raymond Y and Wong. So you can just tag me if you have any questions about that. I'll try to answer those questions. So Brooke just answered with more details with power plants now, but the toxic and use of chemicals. I want to take that issues, and maybe instead of chemicals, we want to use water and turn that into energy. Very good topic, very futuristic in a way. And I want to remind you in a way that we only we are designers in the way that we're innovating with humans and organizations and different things we can interact with. The problem with this is that this is very heavily engineering based. So I think you might want to try to find out, besides the engineering aspect of it, you're not doing chemical engineering, you're trying to do human engineering. You're engineering humans into doing better things. So maybe you want to pivot, think about, oh, power plants are toxic. Why are we not addressing this as a problem? Why do people know about that? Are there activisms about that? If there are activisms, what are those activists trying to call for? Also think about the power distribution, in power plants, or even, especially a lot of discussion and debate about power plants are like nuclear power plants. How do you deal with the nuclear waste? These are the things that maybe not a lot of people are aware of. Maybe your goal would be to engineer those people into being aware of these things. Maybe you want to engineer them into being an activist. And that's kind of what we do, human engineering. That's what I say. It's called human factors engineering. But I think in a way, we're doing social engineering and human engineering in trying to design for experiences and design for behaviors. So I don't think I can give you a full answer to this yet, but I would suggest you and your team go look at what's the scope that you have capacity for. You're not going to have capacity to do chemical engineering. You can propose that as part of the solution, but the other part of the solution must be about adoption. It must be about human stuff, must be about the ecology. And I think, as innovators, as designers, there's a responsibility for us to not just look at the engineering aspect of it, of, oh, how do we turn the chemicals into, something cleaner? How do we generate energy from that? But also, how do we get people to adopt that? If that thing exists, even if that thing exists, what are the bad things that might happen? What are the problems that might occur? And, just the different kind of issues that you might face. So try to look for that. And I'm hoping you success for that. That's a very, very good topic. Okay. Anyone got more questions about your project or anything? We still have, I think, around 2 minutes. I can still address something. I'm going to stay here. And no, I'm going to stop the recording. We're going to pause the recording. I'm just not sure when, Amanda, when would we be able to show the recordings?
Wait, sorry, can you repeat that again?